Michelle, Harry and Meghan Oprah interview, an interview watched by 17.1 million people.
The whole family is saddened to learn the full extent of how challenging the last few years have...
With Harry.
About how dark your baby is going to be?
Meghan met Harry Wales on a blind date set up by a mutual friend.
Was in her own family. You know, her own family thought differently of her.
At Kensington Palace and told them both that it wasn't big enough, that they deserved more. That's what they say in the Netflix series.
And they need more content. They have run out of it, and I think that's a really dangerous position.
Over an unprecedented meeting of royal family members amid the turmoil over Prince Harry and Meghan's decision.
The Queen summoning Prince Charles, Prince William, Prince Harry,
Many thought was inevitable, but surprised at the personal tone of the Queen's statement.
To negotiate several ways they could live their life while also being members of the royal family, a new book has claimed. Harry believed her courtiers got in the way. It states that this was done so that Harry couldn't discuss his exit.
The late Queen Elizabeth II would have supported Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's decision to move out of the UK.
They didn't get the script right because Meghan claimed it was said while she was pregnant.
Her opening up about her mental health and how difficult she found it in the royal family, surely you've got to...
I do not get into people's family matters, and everybody who...
The question remains why the Queen cannot dictate who she sees and when she sees them. And
also see the children, or even perhaps see the children with the Queen. I think that's the photograph.
The Oprah interview ended just before 11 p.m. in California on March 7th, 2021. Within minutes, the phones at Windsor started ringing. Aides on night duty pulled the Queen's senior private secretary out of bed. Across the Atlantic, dawn was already breaking on what would become the most consequential 48 hours of the late Queen's final years. And the most misunderstood. The world saw what came next as silence. 2 days of nothing. Then a 61-word statement that critics called weak, evasive, lawyerly. Saddened. Concerning. Recollections may vary. But Richard Eden, the Daily Mail's diary editor and one of the few royal correspondents with sustained access to Windsor's inner circle, has spent the years since reporting on what those 2 days actually contained. The Queen wasn't paralyzed, she wasn't hiding, she was working, and by the time those 61 words went out, she had already reached her private verdict on Meghan Markle's racism claim, a verdict the public has only ever glimpsed in fragments. This is what happened inside Windsor Castle between March 7th and March 9th, 2021. And why the Queen's real conclusion mattered more than the statement the world received. If you want more deep dives like this, make sure to subscribe to Royal Archives. To understand the verdict, you have to understand the week the Queen was already having. Prince Philip had been admitted to King Edward VII's hospital on February 16th. By early March, he had been transferred to St. Bartholomew's for a heart procedure. The Queen was 94. Her husband of 73 years was seriously unwell. Windsor was running on a skeleton staff because of pandemic restrictions. The Queen was, by all accounts, eating most meals alone. The household around her was thinner than it had been in decades. The operation that supported her had a name inside the castle: HMS Bubble. Roughly 22 staff lived inside the Windsor perimeter, tested weekly, sealed off from their own families. Most of her senior team commuted in from outside the castle gates, masked and tested at the lodge before they were waved through. Her closest aide, dresser, and confidant Angela Kelly was inside the bubble. Her private secretary, Sir Edward Young, was traveling in and out. Charles and Camilla were at Highgrove. William and Catherine were at Anmer Hall in Norfolk. Harry and Meghan were 5,400 miles away in Montecito. The Queen had not hosted a single visiting head of state in over a year. Her usual schedule of audiences had collapsed into video calls conducted from the Oak Room. Her corgis and her one remaining dorgie were her most consistent daily company. Aides who saw her that week have described her as quieter than usual. Not low, but conserving. The kind of quiet she went into before hard decisions. Into that quiet, the Oprah interview landed like a thrown brick. The interview had been trailed for over a week. Palace aides had been bracing. What they could not predict was the specific shape of the accusation, that someone inside the family someone close enough to the unborn Archie to be in conversations about him, had expressed concern about how dark his skin might be. No name, just a shadow over the entire household. The Queen was briefed before it aired. She watched portions herself. According to those familiar with the Windsor routine that week, she watched it twice. The second viewing was longer. She took notes. What she did not do was call an emergency meeting. She did not summon her senior staff into a panicked huddle. She did not pick up the phone to Charles or William first. Eden and other male correspondents have written about the Queen's instinct in moments of family crisis, and that instinct was always the same. Slow down, gather facts, speak to people individually, decide last. The next morning, Monday, March 8th, the Queen began making calls, not to the press, not to her communications team, to her own family. This is the part of the story the public never saw. According to reporting first carried by The Sun and later expanded by Eden's Circle at the Mail, the Queen spent Monday and Tuesday speaking with senior royals one at a time, not on a group call, not in a formal meeting, individual conversations. She wanted to know, in their own words, what they remembered of the period when Meghan was pregnant with Archie. What had been said? What had been heard? Who had been in the room? Palace correspondents who have written about that 48-hour window describe the calls as quiet, methodical, almost forensic. The Queen was not gathering ammunition. She was testing the account she had just watched on television against the memory of the people who had lived through that period inside her family. Charles took the first long call on the Monday morning. William followed in the afternoon. Camilla was consulted. Anne, the Queen's daughter and the family's most trusted operator, was on the line by Monday evening. The conversations were short. The Queen never wasted words on the phone. But they were specific. She asked about dates. She asked about settings. She asked about who else had been present. By Tuesday afternoon, March 9th, she had her answer. What she had concluded, and this is where Eden's reporting becomes most pointed, was that the central skin color conversation, as presented in the Oprah interview, did not match what the people she trusted most remembered. Something had been said at some point by someone, but the version Meghan and Harry had described, in the form they had described it, was not the version the Queen recognized after speaking to her own family. That was the verdict, reached privately, held tightly. The question then became what to do with it. The phrase, "recollections may vary," did not appear by accident. It was drafted, redrafted, and personally approved by the Queen herself. Eden has written about the unusual level of monarch involvement in the wording. A 94-year-old woman, line editing a statement at her own desk, in her own hand. The drafting room was small. Sir Edward Young led it. Donald McCabe, the Queen's communications secretary, sat to his right. A senior lawyer from the household was on the call. According to those familiar with the process, the statement went through at least 4 versions across Monday night and Tuesday morning. The early drafts were longer, more defensive, more specific. Each one came back from the Queen shorter than it went in. The first draft reportedly ran past 200 words. It named the Sussexes directly in multiple places. It included a sentence acknowledging the racism allegation in plain terms, and a separate sentence pushing back on the specifics. The Queen struck the pushback. She would not have the palace appear to be arguing with her own grandson in a press release. The second draft kept the acknowledgement, but added a line about the family's love for Archie. She struck that too. Too sentimental, too obvious, too easily mocked. The third draft introduced an early version of the recollections phrase, but paired it with a longer sentence about the importance of family privacy. She cut the privacy line. It sounded defensive. What survived the fourth pass was a statement that did almost nothing on its surface and almost everything underneath. She cut the defensive language. She cut the specific denials. She cut anything that sounded like the palace was arguing with the Sussexes in public. What she left behind was the architecture of a verdict, acknowledgement, gravity, and a quiet refusal to confirm. 4 words. Royal historians have since called them one of the most carefully constructed phrases of her 70-year reign. They did 3 things at once. They acknowledged the seriousness of the accusation. They refused to confirm it. and they signaled to anyone listening closely that the Queen herself did not accept the account as told. Recollections may vary was not a defense. It was not an attack. It was a verdict, delivered in the only language the monarchy permits itself to use in public. Behind closed doors, those who heard the Queen speak about the matter in the days after the statement went out described her language as more direct. Eden has reported, citing sources close to the household, that the Queen used words like hurt and puzzled, but also words that suggested she did not believe the accusation was as clean as it had been presented. She is said to have asked one senior royal a single question that captured her entire response to the interview. Why now? Why this way? Why publicly? There was no answer she could accept. The Queen had handled a moment like this before. In November 1995, Princess Diana's panorama interview with Martin Bashir had detonated inside the same palace walls. 23 million Britons watched Diana say there were 3 people in her marriage. The Queen took 20 days to respond then. She wrote letters by hand. She instructed Charles and Diana in writing to divorce. The playbook for handling a family member who took private grievances to a global broadcast was already on her desk in 2021. She had written it herself 26 years earlier. The Diana parallel matters because it explains the Queen's pacing. She had learned in 1995 that emotional public responses made things worse, that silence read as guilt, that a single carefully worded statement issued at the right moment could end a debate the palace could not win in real time. The 1995 letter to Charles and Diana was 3 pages. The 2021 statement was 61 words. The Queen had spent 26 years learning how to say less. The 61 words of March 2021 were the same playbook. Older Queen, same method. The difference was the medium. In 1995, the Queen could rely on a Sunday paper cycle to absorb a story over a week. In 2021, the story was global within 4 hours. The Queen's response had to be compressed because the world had been compressed around her. She adapted. The verdict did not. The consequences fanned out immediately. William's now famous denial, "We're very much not a racist family," it was shouted on a school visit in East London 2 days after the statement. It was not freelancing. It was the family's public face giving the Queen's private verdict its outward voice. Charles, by contrast, said nothing in public. He was photographed ignoring a shouted question. That, too, was a decision. The heir was being protected for the long fight, while the future king after him took the immediate hit. For Harry, the verdict ended something quietly. The Queen never publicly defended him after March 2021. She never publicly attacked him either. She simply withdrew the warmth that had defined their relationship for 36 years. Eden has written about her instruction that all Sussex matters be handled at arm's length from then on. Invitations would still come. Photographs would still be taken when required. But the Queen's personal involvement in the Sussex story ended that week. Meghan was never spoken of again in the Queen's presence, according to staff who served her in the final 18 months of her life. The verdict held, and it shaped every single Sussex flashpoint that followed. April 17th, 2021. Prince Philip's funeral at St. George's Chapel. Pandemic restrictions limited attendance to 30. The seating plan was personally reviewed by the Queen. Harry walked in the procession behind the coffin, but in the chapel, he was placed across the aisle from William, separated by their cousin Peter Phillips. Royal watchers debated the symbolism for weeks. Inside Windsor, the placement was understood as deliberate. The Queen had decided where her grandson sat at her husband's funeral. The verdict was in the geometry. June 4th, 2021. Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor was born in Santa Barbara. The Sussex camp briefed that the Queen had been consulted about the name. Within hours, palace sources told the BBC that the Queen had never been asked. The contradiction made global headlines. Eden and others reported that the Queen had personally instructed the briefing she would not allow her own childhood nickname, used only by Philip and her closest family, to be claimed without her direct knowledge. The line drawn that day was a direct extension of the verdict. The Sussexes would not be allowed to define the family from California. June 2nd, 2022. The Platinum Jubilee Balcony. After months of speculation, the Queen ruled that only working royals would appear with her for the RAF flypast. Harry and Meghan watched from inside Buckingham Palace. They appeared at Trooping the Colour in a side carriage. They left Britain before the Jubilee concert. The balcony decision was the verdict made architectural, the literal physical space of the monarchy redrawn around her conclusion from March 2021. Each of those decisions traced back to the same private conclusion the Queen had reached in those 2 days at Windsor. She never wavered, she never softened, she never revisited it. And here's where the story becomes harder to tell, because the Queen took the full version of her verdict with her when she died at Balmoral on September 8th, 2022. The 4-word public phrase is all the world will ever officially have. The longer version, what she actually said to the senior royals she called that week, what notes she made during her second viewing, what she wrote in her own hand on the drafts of the statement, remains inside the family. But the people she spoke to that week are still alive. Senior royals, aides, the drafters of the statement. Pieces of what she said in those 48 hours have been surfacing slowly in Eden's columns and elsewhere for nearly 5 years. More will surface. The Queen's private verdict was never meant to stay private forever. It was meant to outlast her, to shape how history remembered the Oprah interview long after the cameras went dark and the audience moved on. That work is still going on. If you want to follow the rest of what the Queen said in those final years, the conversations she had about Harry, about Meghan, about the family she spent her whole life protecting, make sure you're subscribed to Royal Archives. There is more coming. The people who heard her are starting to talk.